Once upon a time, in a far-off kingdom, there lived a beautiful and kind-hearted girl named Cinderella. Despite the hardships she faced, including the loss of her beloved father and the cruelty of her stepmother and stepsisters, Cinderella never lost hope and remained determined to find happiness. One day, an invitation arrived at Cinderella's doorstep, inviting all eligible maidens to attend a grand ball at the palace. Cinderella longed to go, but her stepmother forbade her from attending. With the help of her fairy godmother, however, Cinderella was able to attend the ball and capture the heart of the handsome prince. But their road to true love was not without obstacles, as the wicked stepmother and her daughters tried to come between them. With courage, perseverance, and the power of love, Cinderella and the prince overcame all challenges and found their happily ever after. This is the story of Cinderella, a timeless tale of love, hope, and the triumph of the human spirit. Let's now begin the story. Once upon a time, in a kingdom far, far away, there was a beautiful girl named Cinderella. She lived with her father, who was a wealthy merchant, and her stepmother and two stepsisters. Cinderella's mother had passed away when she was young, leaving her alone with her father. At first, Cinderella's life was happy and carefree. She and her father were very close, and he doted on her. However, when her father remarried, everything changed. Cinderella's stepmother was cold and cruel, and her stepsisters were just as wicked. They forced Cinderella to do all the housework, cooking, and cleaning while they lounged around and enjoyed a life of luxury. Cinderella's days were long and hard. She woke up early in the morning to light the fire, prepare breakfast, and clean the house. Then, she spent the rest of the day doing endless chores, while her stepsisters ridiculed her and made fun of her. Despite all of this, Cinderella remained kind and gentle. She dreamed of a better life, but she never lost hope. One day, the king announced that he was throwing a grand ball at the palace. All the young ladies in the kingdom were invited, including Cinderella's stepsisters. Cinderella was not allowed to attend, as her stepmother claimed that she was too busy with the housework. Cinderella was heartbroken, but she did not give up hope. She knew that someday, her dreams would come true. As she sat by the fire, tears streaming down her face, a tiny voice spoke to her. It was her fairy godmother, who had been watching over her all this time. The fairy godmother promised to help Cinderella attend the ball and meet the prince. With a wave of her wand, she transformed a pumpkin into a magnificent carriage, mice into horses, and Cinderella's rags into a beautiful gown. She warned Cinderella that she must leave the ball before midnight, or her magical transformation would end. Cinderella was overjoyed and grateful to her fairy godmother. She stepped into the carriage and set off for the palace. As she rode through the streets, people stopped and stared in amazement. Cinderella felt like a princess, and for the first time in a long time, she was happy. As Cinderella entered the ballroom, all eyes turned to her. She felt a sudden wave of self-consciousness as she realized that she was wearing her fairy godmother's beautiful gown. But as she looked around the room, she saw that everyone was smiling at her, and she felt a rush of confidence. The prince saw Cinderella and was immediately struck by her beauty. He made his way over to her, introduced himself, and asked her to dance. Cinderella was delighted and nervous at the same time. She had never danced with a prince before, but she had learned some basic steps from her father. As they danced, Cinderella felt like she was floating on air. The prince was charming and kind, and she felt like they had an instant connection. The other guests watched in amazement as Cinderella and the prince danced. They had never seen anyone move with such grace and elegance. Cinderella's stepsisters, who were used to being the center of attention, were jealous of her and whispered snide remarks to each other. As the night wore on, Cinderella and the prince continued to dance and talk. Cinderella felt like she was living in a fairy tale. For a few precious hours, she was able to forget about her life of drudgery and enjoy the company of a kind and handsome prince. But as midnight approached, Cinderella remembered her fairy godmother's warning. She knew that she had to leave the ball before the clock struck 12. She reluctantly said goodbye to the prince and made her way to the door. As she left the palace, she dropped one of her glass slippers on the steps. The next day, the prince ordered his servants to search the entire kingdom for the woman who had worn the glass slipper. The slipper was a perfect fit, and he knew that whoever had worn it was his true love. The search was long and difficult, with the prince's servants traveling far and wide to try the slipper on the feet of every eligible woman in the kingdom. Cinderella's stepsisters tried to squeeze their feet into the slipper, but it was too small for them. Finally, the servants arrived at Cinderella's house. The stepsisters laughed when they saw the slipper and told the servants that there was no way their scullery maid could be the woman who had worn it. But when Cinderella tried on the slipper, it fit her perfectly. The prince's servants were overjoyed and whisked her away to the palace. As Cinderella arrived at the palace, the prince was waiting for her at the foot of the stairs. He took her hand and led her to a grand hall where they could talk in private. Cinderella felt her heart racing as she looked into the prince's eyes. The prince was overjoyed to see Cinderella again, and he knew in his heart that she was the woman he had been searching for. He confessed his feelings to her, telling her that he had fallen in love with her from the moment they had met at the ball. Cinderella was overwhelmed with emotion. She had never dreamed that a prince could fall in love with a simple girl like her. She confessed her own feelings to the prince, telling him that she too had fallen in love with him. The two of them spent hours talking and laughing together, and they knew that they were meant to be together. The prince asked Cinderella to marry him, and she said yes. Cinderella's stepsisters were furious when they heard that the prince had chosen Cinderella as his bride. They had always been jealous of her and couldn't stand the thought of her marrying a prince. Their mother, the wicked stepmother, saw an opportunity to gain wealth and power for her family. She devised a plan to prevent Cinderella from marrying the prince. She bribed the palace guards to lock Cinderella in her room and to tell the prince that she had fallen ill. The prince was devastated when he heard the news. He rushed to Cinderella's room to see her, but the guards refused to let him in. He knew that something was not right, and he suspected that the stepmother was behind it all. The prince was determined to rescue Cinderella from her room and expose the wicked stepmother's treachery. He snuck into the house, disguised as a servant, and made his way to Cinderella's room. When he saw Cinderella, he was relieved to find that she was not really ill. She was overjoyed to see him, and they embraced each other tightly. The prince then revealed his true identity and his plan to rescue her from the clutches of her wicked stepmother. Together, they escaped the house and ran to the palace. The wicked stepmother and her daughters were shocked when they saw Cinderella and the prince together, and they knew that their plan had failed. The prince publicly announced his love for Cinderella and his intention to marry her, despite the wicked stepmother's objections. The people of the kingdom were overjoyed to hear the news, and they celebrated the prince's bravery and love for Cinderella. The day of Cinderella and the prince's wedding arrived. It was a grand affair, with guests from all over the kingdom in attendance. Cinderella wore a beautiful white gown and a pair of glass slippers that sparkled in the sunlight. As the ceremony began, Cinderella and the prince exchanged vows and rings, promising to love each other for eternity. The people of the kingdom cheered and threw flowers as the newlyweds made their way down the aisle. The celebration continued into the night, with music, dancing, and feasting. Cinderella and the prince were the happiest they had ever been, surrounded by their loved ones and each other. This is the end of the story. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the magical world of Cinderella. I hope you enjoyed this timeless tale of love, hope, and the triumph of the human spirit. I am grateful to all of you for taking the time to read and listen to my stories. Your support and encouragement mean the world to me, and I hope to continue bringing you more exciting stories in the future. If you enjoyed this story, I invite you to follow and subscribe to my channel for more exciting stories. Stay tuned for more adventures, more love stories, and more tales of courage and perseverance. Thank you once again for joining me on this adventure. May your own stories be filled with love, hope, and the happy endings you deserve.